Hi, I'm Micah Siegel, and welcome to the Rogue Scholar Academy podcast. Today's guest is Professor James Gelvin at UCLA. He's a historian of the Middle East, and in this episode, we'll be discussing the Israel-Palestine conflict. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jim.
Thank you for having me. And I want to say in the very beginning, I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Thank you very much. So my first question is more about how you're a historian. So you spent a great deal of your career studying the Israel-Palestine conflict. Was that your idea from the beginning, or how did that happen?
Well, my idea from the beginning was actually I got into the Middle East by studying philosophy. And I was attracted to the philosophy of a man by the name of Ibn Sina, who wrote in the Middle Ages. And I decided at that point that I really wanted to study the Middle East. But the problem with studying the Middle East in that period is the number of languages you have to have in order to be able to master it. I mean, Arabic is one thing, but you have to have two varieties of Turkish, Persian, Uyghur, Mongol, Chinese, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided to instead focus my efforts on the modern period when I could get by with European languages and Arabic, which is what I do.
So how do both Israelis and Palestinians see the history of the land and the 1948 UN deal?
Well, both have claims to the land. The Israelis trace their claim to the land back to the Bible, the covenant with God. The Palestinians, of course, were there when the Israelis, or when the precursors to the Israelis, when the Zionists arrived in the late 19th century. In 1948, the United Nations partitioned Palestine between Palestinians and Israel, or those who would become Israelis. The story behind that is that after World War I, the British got control over the territory of Palestine. And after World War II, the British decided they couldn't do it anymore. There was the hostility between the two communities, and between the two communities and the British was too great. So they dumped it on the United Nations. And so the United Nations decided to split the difference. They decided to partition Palestine between the Jewish inhabitants of Palestine and the Palestinian inhabitants of Palestine. And that led to the first Palestinian War in 1948.
Right. So how do both Israelis and Palestinians see the 1967 Six-Day War?
Well, 1948 didn't solve anything, actually. The Arab countries, after 1948, invaded Palestine and basically were repulsed by Israeli forces. And so in 1956, there was another conflict between Israel and its neighbors. And then in 1967, another conflict between Israel and its neighbors. Now, 1967 was probably the most serious of them, although it was a very short conflict. It was only 6 days of war. But Israel had conquered a large mass of Arab territory, including the entire Sinai Peninsula and the heights of Syria and in western Syria called the Golan Heights, which had integrated into Israel. But for the Palestinians, the worst was yet to come, which was because the Israelis also conquered territories that was a home to a large group of Palestinians. That was the Gaza Strip, which had been administered by Egypt after 1948, and the West Bank, which had been administered by Jordan after 1948. The Israelis also conquered eastern Jerusalem, which Jerusalem had been divided between Israel and Jordan beforehand. So here we have three Palestinian territories that were conquered and started their occupation of the West Bank, their occupation of Gaza, and their occupation of Jerusalem. Israel claims that Jerusalem is its indivisible capital. So the Palestinians were very unhappy about the results of 1967. But on the other hand, it changed the nature of Palestinian resistance. Because before 1967, the Palestinians had thought that the Arab states would liberate Palestine for them. After 1967, they had no illusions about that. So the Palestinians reorganized the Palestine Liberation Organization. Yasser Arafat became the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And over the course of the 60s and 70s, the Palestine Liberation Organization threw its weight around and became recognized in the 1970s as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people.
So, Jim, do you have a personal connection to the land?
I don't have a personal connection to the land. I'm sort of, I like to think of myself as a neutral outsider. I look at both these claims, and frankly, I look at all nationalist claims as being fictitious. They're a result of a narrative that we tell ourselves. So, the Israeli claims to the land, the Palestinian claims to the land, Palestinian nationalism, Zionism, they're both, I view as being fictitious. But that doesn't mean they don't exist, and that doesn't mean they don't guide people, and people feel very strongly about them. So ultimately, what I'd like to see is some resolution to the conflict that takes the claims of both groups seriously.
What created Hamas?
Hamas is a Islamist and nationalist organization, and the two are not incompatible. Hamas wants the liberation of all of Palestine, and it believes that this is a religious endowment from God, that Palestine can't be given away. It also wants to impose Islamic law in Palestine and also Islamic customs and mores, for example, women wearing the hijab, for example. The Hamas arose in the late 1980s during the Palestinian uprising against the Israelis in 1987. The ground had been very well prepared for Hamas. In the 1970s, Arab oil producing states had raked in a fortune because they raised the price of oil. And a lot of this money went to the neighbors of the Gulf states. Some of it went to Palestine, where the Gulf states financed, for example, charities and financed various organizations and financed mosque construction. And this was the foundation for Hamas to emerge. But Hamas, ironically, emerged also as a result of Israeli actions or perhaps inaction. We don't really know. Israel turned the other way when Hamas was getting financing from the Gulf states. We don't know if Israel itself supported the emergence of Hamas or just sort of like turned a blind eye to the emergence of Hamas. For the Israelis, Hamas did not represent a threat. And the idea of people turning to personal piety was something that the Israelis preferred to them turning to the PLO. And so the Israelis much preferred having Hamas there than having the PLO there. So the Israelis encouraged the emergence of Hamas either by, as I said, turning a blind eye to it or by actually encouraging people to join Hamas.
What is the Palestinian Authority?
Well, in 1993, the Israelis and the Palestinians decided enough was enough. And this was the end of the Cold War. This was when everybody was thinking that, we were going to have peace all over the world. And so Palestinians and Israelis recognized each other mutually. The Israelis recognized a Palestinian nation, not a Palestinian state, but a Palestinian nation. And the Palestinians recognized an Israeli state that controlled about 78% of historic Palestine. So from the beginning, there was this disparity between what the two groups were recognizing. As I said, the Israelis recognized that there was a group of people called Palestinians, and the Palestinians recognized that there was a state of Israel. They decided that what they were going to do was to, after the recognitions, they were going to sit down and begin negotiations about things like borders and the future of Jerusalem and the right of Palestinians to return to Palestine. And so they set up a series of conferences to do that, a series of meetings. And out of the Oslo Accord, which is what this accord was all about, they came up with this idea that there would be a authority that would be negotiating on the basis on behalf of the Palestinians, an authority that would represent the Palestinians, and that would negotiate with the Israelis about future borders and all the other issues that came up. Now, this was the Palestinian Authority. The PA was elected in soon thereafter in 1994. And the PA and Israel began a series of negotiations about Israeli withdrawals, about what territory the PA would control in the West Bank, etc. Now, the PA controlled the entire Palestinian national movement until 2007, when there was a split between Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. There was a very brief but bloody civil war that took place between the two groups. And Hamas has controlled Gaza ever since, and the PA has controlled the Palestinian territories in the West Bank ever since.
What happened to the PLO?
The PLO was integrated into the PA. There's three layers that we should understand. There's the layer of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which is elected by Palestinians and is supposed to represent the Palestinians in the territories. There is the PLO itself, which is an umbrella group that represents many of the factions within the PA. And then the largest of the groups within the PLO is Fatah. Now, this was Yasser Arafat's group, and this is still the largest group within the Palestinian Authority. Basically, what happened was they took off their uniforms, they put on business suits, and that's what the Palestinian Authority is right now. So the Palestinian Authority is the umbrella that includes members of the PLO, and the largest faction within the PLO is Fatah.
What triggered the October 7th attack?
Well, that's a good question. We don't really know. I mean, the attack itself, of course, was a Hamas attack from Gaza on into Israel. But we think, using history as our to teach us a lesson, that organizations like Hamas have launched attacks on Israel mainly for three reasons. The first has been to keep the Palestinian issue on the front burner of international politics. What I'm referring to is that many of people watching know about the Abraham Accords between Israel and various other states, Israel and Bahrain, for example, Israel and Morocco. Various Arab states negotiated with Israel and to end the state of war between those states and Israel. The fear on the part of many in the Arab world was that Saudi Arabia was going to join the Abraham Accords and also make peace with Israel. Now, the problem with that is not the problem of making peace with Israel. The problem with that is selling out the Palestinians, because the Palestinians would get nothing from Saudi Arabia and Israel making peace. So this is possibly one of the reasons why the Hamas launched its attack. Another reason why was to get a jump on the PLO. In other words, the PLO has been negotiating with Israel and has won nothing. And Israel has pretty much not withdrawn from the territories. And so Hamas wants to demonstrate that their way was better than the PLO's way, was better than the Palestinian Authority's way. So they did that in order to prove that as well. And then finally, Palestinian factions have always launched operations to bust up any compromises that might be made. And certainly the expansion of the Abraham Accords was going to be a compromise that was beyond the wishes of the Palestinians. So, in order to put the Palestinian question back on the table, in order to end any compromises, in order to make sure that the Arab states would come around, Hamas very likely launched this attack on Israel.
So in 2005, Israel left Gaza. How do you see that?
Well, in 2005, by 2005, the Israelis had had enough of the Oslo process, the process of negotiating with the Palestinians. In the year 2000, the Palestinians had launched a bloodier uprising against the Israelis. The first one was mainly civil disobedience. The second one was suicide bombers. And the Israelis decided that they had enough, that they were going to prevent this from occurring ever again. So they walked away from the bargaining table. And they did three things. Number one, they built the wall, separating the Palestinian territories from Israel. Number two, they created a new political party in Israel that would make the withdrawal of the wall and the withdrawal from Gaza the central planks. And they withdrew from Gaza as well. Now, the attitude at that point was the Prime Minister's Ariel Sharon's attitude was, we don't care what happens beyond the wall. We don't care what happens in Gaza. If you want to have a state, you can have a state. You want to have a democracy, you can have a democracy. You want to have chaos, you can have chaos. We just don't care. All we want is to be rid of this problem once and for all and to finish it off. The problem was that the wall didn't accomplish very much, a wall can't prevent missiles from flying over it. So that basically the Israelis learned their lesson in 2006 that they were going to remain in a perpetual state of war with the Palestinians as well. Then was the Palestinians' turn to walk away from the bargaining table, and the Palestinians began to assert its you began to go around from place to place, asking other states to recognize it as a Palestinian state.
When did the Israelis develop the Iron Dome?
Well, the Israeli Iron Dome was developed in the early 2000s. The idea behind it was the Israelis, first of all, they learned their lesson about missiles coming in from the Gulf War of 1991. So that as soon as the technology reached the point at which it could be utilized, they began to deploy the Iron Dome. And the Iron Dome was deployed in order to to deflect incoming missiles both from the north, from Hezbollah territory, and from the south, from Gaza, from Hamas territory.
How connected is Hamas to the Palestinian people and the Palestinian government?
It's a good question. Well, we know the question about the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. They don't get along together. I like to compare it to a couple that's on the verge of divorce, that half the time they are talking about reconciliation and half the time they're trying to kill each other. And that's exactly what's happening between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. So that's very clear. In terms of the popularity of Hamas among the Palestinian people, we don't know, and we don't know for two reasons. Trying to do a public opinion poll in Palestine is like trying to do a public opinion poll in Russia. You're not going to get people who are going to be very clear with you or very upfront with you about what they really feel. The second thing is that public opinion is very volatile. Look at the public opinion in the United States. Trump was elected president of the United States with a majority of the vote, and now he's down to less than a majority of the vote in terms of public opinion polls. So the volatility of public opinion is something that has to be taken into account. Hamas was increasingly unpopular as the war dragged on. As soon as the ceasefire hit, Hamas became popular again. Hamas is now retaking control of Gaza, and we just don't know what its popularity is.
Where is the corruption and what's the agenda for countries that fund Hamas?
Well, countries that Qatar is a major country that's funded Hamas, and Qatar has worked with Islamist organizations like Hamas, for years now. It actually funded the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and various other organizations as well that were, sort of Islamist, but not as radical Islamist as, for example, Hamas turned out to be, or as Al Qaeda or various other organizations have turned out to be. So that's the major source of funding for Hamas. The government in Gaza or the population of Gaza has gotten employment through the United Nations through a group called UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Administration. And various other governments as well have worked with civil society groups, non-governmental operations in Gaza as well. So the same thing goes with the Palestinian Authority, which has gotten money from the United States and Western Europe, from various other groups as well. The United States, of course, looks at Hamas as a terrorist organization, and so refused not only to give money directly to Hamas, but also has refused indirect funding of Hamas. For example, UNRWA funding of Hamas as well.
What does Qatar want?
Qatar wants fundamentally to be able to hedge its bets in the region. Qatar is a very, very small country, and it's between two giant countries. It's between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and it's got to figure out exactly how to survive in such an environment. So, Saudi Arabia doesn't like the relationship that Qatar has, for example, with Iran. But Qatar and Iran have joint control over a very, very large natural gas field, underwater gas field. Qatar itself has a survival strategy, and the survival strategy is based upon Islamic organizations being Qatar sees as the wave of the future. So these Islamic organizations during for example, uprisings, Qatar supported them because they thought that, there's two things you could do with a wave. You can drown in it on the one hand, or you can surf on it. You could ride it. And so what Qatar decided to do is to ride the wave. It's sort of an insurance policy. So Hamas is a Islamist organization that Qatar has been supporting. And so, therefore, Qatar has given money to Hamas. And the Israelis have known about this, and the Israelis have not blocked it at all because fundamentally they felt that so long as Hamas doesn't collapse into chaos and Gaza doesn't collapse into chaos, that would protect them. And it turned out to be a very bad strategy.
What about Iran?
Iran really is using a proxy or has used proxies, most of which have been eliminated to protect Iran. The idea was to surround Israel with a bunch of Iranian proxies, including Hamas, including Hezbollah, including the Syrian government, and including the Houthis in Yemen, a faction within Yemen. And these would actually protect Iran. Now, since October 7th, Iran has been called on to protect its proxies, which is something that it's not really prepared to do. At this point, the Israelis have pretty much knocked out most of the proxies. Syria, for example, the government has changed in Syria. One of the opposition parties, opposition groups to Bashar al-Assad took power. Hezbollah, the Israelis, as most of your audience knows, was able to destroy many of the cadres of Hezbollah with exploding pagers. Hamas, the Israeli invasion of Gaza, has dealt a severe blow, hasn't eliminated it, but has dealt a severe blow. And this leaves pretty much the Houthis as the only Iranian proxy that's left. Now, why the Iranians need proxies? Because basically they are fundamentally a party that doesn't like the status quo and wants to upset the status quo. They think that the status quo is stacked against them. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is a status quo power. It likes the status quo. It likes the way things are going. So this is the basis for the hostility between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between Iran and Israel, between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Does Iran want war with Israel?
Iran just got war with Israel and learned what could happen from it. So Iran fundamentally does not want war with Israel, as far as I can see. I mean, fundamentally, Iran knows that Israel is perfectly capable of more than holding its own against Iran. But what Iran wants is it wants some sort of deterrent capability against Israel. It wants to make sure that Israel can't repeat what it just did, which was bombing out its nuclear sites, for example. So I don't believe that Iran wants war with Israel. What I do believe is that that Iran wants to deter Israel because Israel is on the opposite side of the divide between Iran and Saudi Arabia and Israel. So therefore, wants to have some form of deterrence. Now, the proxies that it had was its previous form of deterrence, but it didn't really deter Israel and were fairly easily overcome. Now Iran has no deterrence against Israel except potentially in the future a nuclear weapon.
What about Lebanon and Syria?
Well, Lebanon and Syria are both fairly chaotic at the present time. Lebanon has major economic problems, and Syria the government is trying to figure out a way of moving forward. The government of Syria is brand new. It is emerged out of a Islamist organization, which has to unite a very fractious community, including those people that supported the previous dictator of Syria, including those people who want those groups that want autonomy, like the Kurds in the east of Syria, including a minority in the west of Syria called the Alawites, including another minority called the Druze that are on the Syrian Israel border. So they've got to figure out what to do. Now, what Israel wants from Syria is it wants a very loosely structured governing structure of Syria. What the Syrians probably want is they want a tighter structure. And so this has been the problem between Syria and Israel. Israel has occupied parts of Syria in an effort actually to make sure that the Syrians are not capable of strong arming its population into a strong state as they had in the past. In terms of Lebanon, the Israelis have wanted the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah. The Lebanese army is incapable really of doing much of anything. Very likely what's going to happen in Lebanon is a continuation of what's going on now, which is low-level warfare between Israel and Hezbollah.
What are some important disagreements among Israelis?
Well, you've got two types of disagreements. You've got disagreements that are taking place within Israel and disagreements about foreign policy. In terms of foreign policy, that's the easy one. You have Israelis who want to keep the territories and Israelis who basically are prepared to give them up. You have Israelis who want to expand settlements into territories, and you have Israelis who want to stop expanding settlements and allow Palestinians to take charge of most of the territories. So that's the big question. What's going to happen to the territories? In the government now, you have people who want to keep all of the territories to annex the West Bank and maybe even Gaza as well. In terms of the internal dynamics of Israel, you have a whole bunch of issues in Israeli politics that are very, very difficult to resolve. For example, the question of whether or not ultra-Orthodox men can be drafted into the military. They've been given draft exemptions, but many Israelis view that as being very unfair. That why are secular Israelis and less Orthodox Israelis draftable, whereas Orthodox Israelis, ultra-Orthodox Israelis are not. But the government needs the support of the ultra-Orthodox parties, and so therefore has been pressing for the retention of the deferments for ultra-Orthodox. The other question has to do with Benjamin Netanyahu's future. Benjamin Netanyahu is the Prime Minister of Israel, long-serving Prime Minister of Israel, but he is under indictment on three charges of corruption. Now, if his government falls, very likely what's going to happen is that he will be put on trial. Well, he's on trial now, but he will be convicted of corruption and may even face jail time. So what he's got to do is to keep this coalition going. The coalition includes very, very right-wing people, very ultra-Orthodox people, and so therefore he is basically prisoner to these groupings. So this is why the strategy was chosen that was chosen in the war in Gaza was a losing strategy. I mean, basically, the strategy that the Israelis wanted to implement was a strategy of destroying Hamas. Hamas is not going to be destroyed. Hamas is totally integrated into Palestinian society. We see now with the ceasefire that Hamas has not been destroyed, that Hamas is reclaiming territory that the Israelis are not occupying in Gaza at the present time. So the maximalist demands of the right wing and of the ultra-Orthodox are basically the demands that are guiding Netanyahu's waging of the war, and very likely the reasons why the ceasefire is going to fail in the upcoming period. Labor Party.
So, what does the Labor Party want?
Doesn't matter. The Labor Party is so weak at the present time that, it's basically, what do the Social Democrats in America want? It's the same sort of idea that the Labor Party is not really an effective party at the present time. It's got very, really little representation in the Knesset in the Israeli parliament. So the parties now are from the center right to the far right are the parties that really make a difference in Israeli politics, and it's been increasingly this way since the 1980s.
How many Israelis do you think have settled in the West Bank, and what do you think will happen there?
Well, there's about 250,000 Israelis in the West Bank. That's not including Israelis who have settled in the eastern part of Jerusalem. That area is not an area that the Israelis consider to be a settlement area. That's considered part of Israel. So they don't count them in the settler numbers. So about 250,000 Israelis are now in the West Bank, not including Israel, maybe up to 500,000, not including Jerusalem, maybe up to 500,000 overall. What's going to happen with the settlements? Well, they were supposed to be negotiated between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which one can stay, which ones would be eliminated. But those negotiations, there has not been serious negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians since 2015. So those negotiations are not taking place. The question now is not the question of settlement expansion, because settlements are being expanded, but the question of what's going to happen ultimately with the West Bank. Whether or not the West Bank, there's going to be territory within the West Bank that's going to be set aside for a Palestinian state, which at this point is doubtful, or whether or not Israel is going to annex the West Bank. In other words, integrate the West Bank into greater Israel. There's arguments for that among Israelis, arguments against that among Israelis. The major argument against that among Israelis is that you're going to be integrating a large number of Palestinians into Israel. Do you really want to do that?
How does Jordan figure into this?
Jordan is at peace with Israel. It's been at peace with Israel since 1994. The Jordanian attitude is that fundamentally it would wish the Palestine issue would go away. It thought that the Palestine issue was resolved. I mean, it made peace with Israel in 1994 because Israel was negotiating with the Palestinians starting in 1993. So there's no point for Jordan to be at war anymore with Israel if the Palestinians were going to negotiate a settlement. Now, you got to look at Jordan, two aspects of the relationship with the Palestinians. Number one, the majority of Jordanians are Palestinian. They're not people from the east bank of the Jordan River, they're Palestinians. And so there's a very, very strong attachment of Jordanians with the Palestinian cause. And secondly, the Jordanian government, like every other government, and I really want to emphasize it, like every other government in the Middle East, it's not that they're pro-Palestinian per se. It's not that they're anti-Israel per se. What they want is the whole problem to go away. And they're perfectly willing to, sell out the Palestinians if it could be done without raising the ire of their populations. Now, the problem is that the populations of most of the Arab world are very, very, very pro-Palestinian. And so the governments have to listen to the street, as it's called, the Arab street. And so they can't really just out and out sell out the Palestinians. What they have to do is they have to use a fig leaf, which is, for example, the idea of, well, we support in the future the foundation of a Palestinian state, and the Israelis will make peace with us with the understanding that we support a Palestinian state in the future. That is not going to sell them very much after the massive killings that have taken place in Gaza.
If you could wave a magic wand and create your ideal solution, what would that be?
Oh, the ideal solution would be a one-state solution. And I don't mean it like Israelis mean it or Palestinians mean it when you talk to their politicians. What I mean about a one-state solution is that Israelis and Palestinians live under the same government, throughout the entirety of the territory that stretches from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. Now, they can't agree on little issues, so they're not going to be able to agree on constitutional issues, major constitutional issues like apportionment of votes and things like that. So that's never going to happen. Right now, the ideal solution is a two-state solution. That's the best we can hope for. And even that might be overstretching it a bit. Now, the two-state solution would probably take the shape of what are called the Clinton parameters. When he was president, Bill Clinton suggested a group of proposals that would end up being sort of like a compromise between the two sides. For example, Jerusalem would not be divided because the Israelis don't want Jerusalem to be divided, but Jerusalem would be shared because the Palestinians want Jerusalem to be shared. There would be no right for Palestinians to return to Israel, but there would be a right of Palestinians to return to Palestine, and those that didn't want to return to the Palestinian state would receive compensation for their losses. So there would be land exchanges. The Israelis would be able to keep the settlements, but the Palestinians would get land from Israel that would be the equivalent of the land that they've taken in Palestine, and so on and so forth. That's the Clinton parameters. I mean, there's a reason why during the 1990s people called him Slick Willie, is because he could find a way out of practically any sort of like conundrum by splitting the difference, which is what he did here. If there is going to be any sort of compromise that's being made between Israelis and Palestinians, it would take the shape of the Clinton parameters. Now, what I'm saying is not that the Clinton parameters are going to be the foundation for a peace. What I'm saying is that if there is a foundation for a peace, it will probably be the Clinton parameters. I'm not optimistic on a peace between Israelis and Palestinians in the near future, or even in the medium-term future.
What about the recent Trump agreement?
The ceasefire is really this agreement is really no different than the agreement that was reached by under Joe Biden. It's a series of steps that will be taken, starting off with a ceasefire in exchange of a swap of Palestinian prisoners for the hostages that were taken on October 7th. And it just that the swap was completed this time. It wasn't completed before. It was piecemeal before. It was always been moving to the second step. Okay, so now that we swapped the hostages and the political prisoners, now what? What are we going to do now? Israel is occupying part of the Gaza Strip, in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is retaking control of the central part of the Gaza Strip and the western part of the Gaza Strip. So what's going to happen? Well, the plan calls for Gaza for Hamas to disarm and not participate in governance, and those are two things that Hamas is not going to agree to. So the Israelis at some point are going to say, okay, look, this is it. It's over. We're done with this thing now, and we're going to resume the war again, which is exactly what's going to happen. So we have a ceasefire, which is going to be, last for until the Israelis lose patience with it. And then basically they're going to restart either the invasion again, or they're going to do what they've done before, which is what they call mowing the grass, which is striking at Hamas targets from mainly from the air, but also with artillery, and degrading Hamas to such an extent that Hamas doesn't pose a threat to Israel anymore. Hamas builds up its strength. Israel then mows the grass again the next year, and then Hamas builds up its strength again, and Israel mows the grass once more. And that's what Israel has been doing, since Hamas took territory, took over the Gaza Strip in 2007, and has continued to will continue to do as well if they don't restart the invasion.
So, James, you're on campus and interacting with students regularly. Since October 7th, there's been a lot of outrage on campuses about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Even some university presidents were fired over the issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are pretty much not like many of the students and not like many of my colleagues. Um, I understand exactly why students are heated on both sides of this issue. I understand that there are Jewish students who feel that they are under assault, not physical assault, but for example, that they are being asked to give up something that it means a lot to them, and a lot of students who look at what's going on, which they classify as a genocide, and which I've got to say I classify as a genocide as well, against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And so therefore they want to take some action here. Now, I'm a veteran of the university protests that took place against the Vietnam War in the 1960s and 1970s. So this is coming from an old man who's experienced it all before, which is get your ass off campus. There's nothing to be won on campus. What you want to do is, if you feel strongly about the Palestine issue, and I feel strongly about the Palestine issue, you do things like this. You talk to the people outside of campus. You talk to every men's club, every women's club, every Democratic Party headquarters, every trade union. You can do it, and try to convince them, and make sure that they call their Congress people to convince Congress that your viewpoint is the viewpoint that should be taken. The United States has behaved shamefully during this last period. And I think that the Democratic Party, paid a price for that during the election as well, when many Democrats sat on their hands. And so, therefore, it's not going to be that difficult to push the Democratic Party in the opposite direction at the present time. So I'm encouraging my students, I'm encouraging my colleagues to take it off campus, to go into the communities, places that you live, and people that you know, your neighbors, and convince them that what you're trying to do is correct.
So, what do you think the U.S. should do?
I think that the United States should hold Israel's feet to the fire. I think that fundamentally the United States should I mean, first of all, the United States should no longer supply Israel with weaponry. I think the United States should no longer block UN resolutions condemning Israeli actions in Gaza and in the West Bank. I think that the United States should support a real two-state solution by pressuring Israel to accept a two-state solution. I think that the United States has a lot more power than it thinks it can inflict. And the old days in which the American Israel Political Action Committee, APAC, can pretty much threaten congressmen and threaten senators with supporting their opposition. that day is sort of like it's in the twilight of that day. I'm not saying that they're powerless anymore, but what I'm willing to say at the present time is that they're not as powerful as they once were before. And so the American population, which is probably aghast at what's going on in Gaza, has a lot more power than it had in the past to change the opinions of the American government. So I think that the American government can take more action. We are Israel's largest supplier of arms. The very fact that we're the largest supplier of arms and those arms are being used against civilians, I think, is shameful. And that the United States should immediately stop the supply of arms to Israel. By the way, this would not be the first time that the United States has done that. The United States twice stopped shipping arms to Israel, supplying arms to Israel in the 1980s during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, because the Israelis were shelling Beirut, for example, shelling civilian areas in Beirut, because the Israelis were taking actions against civilians with American weapons. So Ronald Reagan was somebody who stopped the supply of American weapons to Israel twice during his administration.
And finally, Jim, what do you plan to do for the next several years?
Well, I'm going to continue this sort of thing, which I think is very important. And once again, I really want to thank you for doing this. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, getting the word out as much as possible. I'm going to continue writing. I'm going to continue publishing. I'm going to continue teaching. I don't know how long, but I'm going to try to do it for as long as I'm still capable of doing that. So that's my plans for the future.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. I can tell that there's so much knowledge and so many days and years actually of research behind your words. And it's just a pleasure talking to you. And I hope we can give this to as many people out there and they can see what you have to say.